Mass protests in Cairo and across Egypt to push for change and for quick trials of former government officials accused of abuse of office. But what's really behind the anger this time around? And is the Egyptian revolution, as well as hopes for a free and fair democracy, in danger? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sohail Rahman. It was dubbed the largest protest since the fall of Hosni Mubarak, but the target this time, well, it's the new rulers. Many thousands gathered in Tahrir Square in Cairo on Friday, demanding the prosecution of those involved in the killing of protesters during the 18-day uprising in February. They've also called on the country's military rulers to speed up reforms demanded during that time. Almost 1,000 people were killed and more than 6,000 injured. Now, activists say more than 7,000 people have been arrested in the last 5 months. Amongst the officials of the previous regime, at least 8 ministers are in custody and being investigated, including Mubarak himself, who is due to stand trial on the 3rd of August alongside his sons Ala and Gamal. And joining me on this edition of Inside Story in Cairo, Wael Eskandar, political activist. Over in Beirut, Rami Khouri, director of ISSAM Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. And again in Cairo, Sharif Abdel Kouddous, independent journalist and correspondent for Democracy Now!, a radio and TV programme in the US. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Wael, can I begin with you? I mean, what are these protests about and what do the protesters actually want?
The protesters still want what they wanted on January 25th. They want real change, they want to bring down the regime, and they want less promises and more actions. And what they've been seeing so far is that nothing has been done and that the regime is still the same old regime that they aim to bring down.
Rami Khouri, let me bring you in here from Beirut. You've been watching events, certainly always very interested. I've been reading your editorial, The Egyptian Citizen Won't Stay Silent. We'll come to that later as well. Some very interesting points you make. Would you agree with what Wael has just said from your point of view?
Yes, absolutely. I've been to Egypt recently, but he knows it much better, and I agree completely with what he said. What you're seeing in the broader picture, and you see this all over the Arab world, you're seeing Arab individuals transforming themselves into Arab citizens. The people in Egypt are out there saying we have rights, and we have citizenship rights and human rights, and they want to make sure that the government in Egypt reflects the values and the principles of the Egyptian people and responds to their rights as citizens. And this is really an unbelievably important historic development that's taking place, the birth of the Arab citizen.
Indeed, Sharif Kouddous, I mean, do you think that after Mr. Mubarak was deposed, as you might say, as the president, there was a belief that a much clearer, cleaner, fairer transition would happen very quickly? Are you surprised by what you're seeing on the streets of Cairo today?
Well, after Mubarak was toppled, was forced out of office, he put the Supreme Council in power, and this was something that the people accepted, this change. But over the last 5 months, I think many people here in Egypt have seen that on many revolutionary demands, they're not being fulfilled on issues of primarily right now justice and accountability, as you mentioned in your lead, on issues of economic justice, on issues of social justice, on issues of torture and police abuse. Increasingly, people are seeing that nothing has changed. That while the head of the former regime, Mubarak, and his sons and the top leadership may have been toppled, that the body and soul of the former regime is very much still in place and still acting with impunity. As we've seen, very few, well, not one police officer or not one security official is in prison right now for the killing of nearly 1,000 protesters during the uprising.
No, we'll get into the trials and the security officials that haven't been prosecuted just a little bit later. I just wondered, have you been out on the streets themselves? What are people saying to you? Because as impressive as the pictures are, certainly on Friday from Tahrir Square, there must also be people that aren't very impressed or don't want to see these demonstrations on the streets, either because they are Mubarak supporters or they think the transitional government needs more time.
Well, I mean, the turnout today, I think, is very large, and many are saying this is the biggest protest since Mubarak fell down. And so I think that really gives legitimacy to people's claims that the Supreme Council is not performing as many had hoped. We've heard kind of the same kind of rhetoric throughout in any form of dissent being labeled as thuggery or being labeled as some kind of foreign conspiracy. But what some people have said is that they give the Supreme Council more time, but it's been 5 months and very little has been achieved in terms of justice, in terms of accountability. And so I think people know now that they have to take to the streets as they have done before to try and achieve some of their demands.
Okay, well, let's just go quickly over to Wael again in Cairo. What have people been saying to you, and would you agree with what you've just heard from Sharif?
Yeah, I would agree that people really are calling for change. The real challenge, though, is that the military has been using the same tactics of the old regime of corrupt media, state media, spreading lies, misinformation, and really making people feel they're very, very insecure. And it's actually incredible that people are getting past all these tactics and going out to protest. And that explains why there are a lot of people who are still blinded by these tools, by the media, and think that there shouldn't be demonstrations and that things are going in the right direction.
Well, let me bring in Rami. You've listened to both of these guys in Cairo. And Rami, if I can just quote from the Daily Star that you write for, and your article, The Egyptian Citizen Won't Stay Silent. You say that if the newborn Arab citizen is the most important political consequence of the past 6 months, the demand for social justice is the most important philosophical and value-driven underpinning the new Arab citizenry. The issue of not just justice, but social justice has now become so embedded in these uprisings that we've seen. Could you just expand on that for us, about what is driving the ordinary Egyptian on the street, about why they want to see this justice?
Well, it's the same thing that's been driving ordinary Arabs all across this region for, I would say, the last 3 or 4 decades. But two things happened. The political regimes in the Arab world completely suppressed these movements, and none of them were able to make any major breakthroughs. And the global media, especially the major Western media that dominate the world, completely missed the biggest story of the last century of the Arab people, which is several 100 million Arabs demanding their rights peacefully through demonstrations, through joining Islamist groups, through joining student groups, labor unions, human rights groups, opposition groups, women's groups, neighborhood committees. All kinds of signs were there for the last 30 years or so of people wanting to be treated fairly and decently. It's no accident that social justice has emerged as the common rallying point all across the region, whether people ask for regime change or just reforms or constitutional change in monarchies, whatever they want to be treated fairly by their own governments. And that doesn't mean that everybody gets rich. It just means that everybody has the same basic chance in life to get an education, to get a job, to be treated fairly according to a single standard by their own government. And this is so powerful, and it has come out now much more into the open. And I think you will see this increasing with more clarity as people, for instance, talk about the rights of women, the rights of the handicapped people, the rights of young people, minority groups. But social justice cuts across the whole gamut of human rights, and it is just now emerging very, very clearly.
The galvanization, Sharif, of what we're seeing on the streets across Egypt, we're talking about Suez as well as Alexandria, seem to show people from all walks of life yet again galvanized by the events perhaps of the last month or so. And you alluded to this just a short while ago, the release of police officer, the bail of police officers accused of potentially killing individuals, the acquittal of former ministers. I mean, how has that galvanized people in the way that they feel that the interim military council is not really doing their job very well?
Well, I think it's a key issue right now. We've seen this really build up over the last few weeks and culminate in this protest today. We saw the second postponement of the trial of the much reviled former Interior Minister Habib al-Adli on the 26th. That sparked clashes with police outside the courtroom. The families, keep in mind, of the people killed in the revolution are not even allowed inside the court to view the trial, and so there were clashes outside after this trial was postponed. 2 days later, families of martyrs were mistreated by police, and that sparked clashes. Large clashes in the streets of Tahrir and near the Ministry of Interior, in which more than 1,000 people were injured. As you mentioned, in Suez, 7 police officers convicted accused of killing protesters were released on bail until September. The trial was postponed. That sparked clashes, and in Suez, they have occupied a square now for the past 4 days and are protesting today. We've seen the acquittal of former ministers. Many see that the Supreme Council, which only has its legitimacy from the people, from the revolution, from the people, are not fulfilling is not fulfilling its role as holding people to account here. And many are afraid that the trial of Mubarak and his son, scheduled to begin on August 3rd, will also be delayed, because this is being held during the month of Ramadan, and much of the judiciary does not even function. Well, and so I think this is at the very core of the issues right now, and why people are taking to the streets. But it's only a part of a much larger problem, in that, as the other guests have mentioned, social justice, economic justice, police abuse have not been addressed at all, and the Supreme Council is failing in this, and people, this is not what people fought for and died for in the uprising. And
you bring me very neatly then to my next question, is about whether the Supreme Military Council is dragging its feet. Wael, can I bring you in here? Do you think there has been enough time to build a case against the president now, when we expect a trial on, August the 3rd?
I think there has been a lot of time spent by the military in power to actually build a case. And I think that the stark contrast between military trials of activists or the families of the martyrs compared to policemen who are still in their jobs. They're accused of killing protesters, and not only are they free, but they are practicing their same jobs. That shows a stark contrast in the idea of justice, and that points to the fact that they really have no intention of trying the corrupt regime. They're postponing it, and that is just slow justice, or rather injustice.
Right. Well, let me bring Rami Khouri back in here, because I'd like to now look, if we can move this conversation on, to the intricacies and the pivotal people at the centre of what's going on. Rami, the Interior Minister, Mansour Asawi's words just a few days ago, on Wednesday I think it was, he said that he wanted to, or try and sack as many people of the Interior Ministry that were involved in the killings or the crackdowns and bring them to justice. Fine words, but what do you expect is going to happen, if you could see into a crystal ball?
Oh, I would suspect that some people will be put on trial, but probably not sufficiently to satisfy the people out there demonstrating. I think one of the critical points that you mentioned, Sohail, is the fact that there may be people, I mean, there are people clearly in Egypt who are not out demonstrating. It doesn't mean they're Mubarak supporters, but they might feel, well, we need to give the government or the ruling military council a bit more time. That you have actually something that is being born alongside the birth of the Arab citizen, which is the birth of Arab politics. And this is now a process. You see it in Tunisia, you see it in other countries slowly, where competing forces engage each other, hopefully peacefully and democratically, but out of that engagement comes some kind of national consensus, which leads to a legitimate policy that reflects the consent of the governed. That whole process is just starting now in Egypt, and I think you will find in every one of these decisions that the ruling Supreme Military Council will take some decisions, the government will take some decisions, there'll be back and forth between people in the street and organized movements like labor unions or judges or lawyers or others, and a process is now in place that has give and take, and people opposing each other, challenging each other. So this is really what's going to determine what will happen. But clearly, the legitimacy of the exercise of power in Egypt now stems from the consent of the governed in a way that hasn't happened ever in modern Egypt. And this is why the people out on the street are so important now, because they're keeping up the pressure on the ruling authorities to actually deliver what the people expect.
And I think the four of us are in agreement that we're all intrigued by the amount of time it is taking for things to move on. So Rami, if I just quickly then ask you that in this particular instance, we're now seeing groups like the 6th of April movement, the Muslim Brotherhood, now galvanised, now working together, you might say, in this particular demonstration. The Muslim Brotherhood have stepped back. They've allowed the people to make their moves. And if we're talking about the fact that things haven't gone as quickly as possible, interesting move by the Muslim Brotherhood to unite with all the other groups as well.
Well, I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood are of the people, but they have a certain political and religious tendency. But they've clearly realized that, first of all, they don't have the dominant force to dominate the opposition as they did before. There are now all kinds of civic groups out there demonstrating, and the real strength of the Muslim Brotherhood will become clear. My guess is they will represent a strong but minority group in Parliament. But the more interesting thing is that they've actually been making deals. I think they made a deal about these demonstrations today to join the demonstrations in return for agreement on not opposing the postponement of the elections or not postponing the elections. There's deal making going on, and that's what I mean by the birth of politics. People will understand that democracy also means making deals and compromises to have a majority, to therefore have a legitimate decision-making power. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, and people will become more sophisticated in doing it. You'll also see, as you're already seeing, splits within the Muslim Brotherhood, that these former monolithic groups will divide up into smaller groups.
Let me go over then to Sharif, because obviously you've got Muslim Brotherhood as one group, you've got a real young force in the 6th of April, you've got the Liberals and you've got the Democrats, even the Islamists as well. Some are saying, you know, we need to give the military council more time. In terms of how all of these groups have united on this particular day, what are you reading into that about the way this movement is moving forward and telling the Supreme Military Council, get a move on?
Well, I think it sends a very clear message that people are united in their demands for justice and accountability, and that they're not pleased with the way the Supreme Council is governing the country. But on the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood joining today, I think let's be clear. In the beginning, they said they would not join the protests today, and they turned around a couple of days ago and said they would join, I think because they realized that the level of dissatisfaction was massive, and that the turnout would be a large with or without them. And I think they made a political decision to join today's protests. They are not engaging in an open sit-in, which many people here are doing. There's many tents set up in the middle of Tahrir. They've decided to leave at 5 p.m. today. And let's keep in mind also, they did not, their first boycott of a protest was on May 27th, what was dubbed the second day of rage. They did not take part in that protest, and I think they came under criticism for that. As Rami mentioned, of course, they are experiencing dissent within their own ranks with the Shabab of the Brotherhood, the younger forces really distancing themselves in a growing manner from the senior leadership and taking part in protests which the leadership does not want to. But many political parties of all stripes are here today. Many groups are here, youth groups, like as you mentioned, the April 6th group is probably the largest. And I think it sends a very clear message to the Supreme Council that what has been happening for the last 5 months is unacceptable, and changes must be made.
Well, let me move over then to Wael, because while we talk about the groups and them galvanising today, this all leads to the fact that there are elections pending, parliamentary elections pending in September, and you vote as well on the changes to the constitution. Wael, this all focuses perhaps as well on the Prime Minister, ISSAM Fares, who was a former minister. He resigned from Mubarak's government, for our viewers who don't know this, and they joined the protesters and, you know, basically was pushed by the protesters, you might say, to become the Prime Minister. He said that if he failed, he would return to them. I mean, how do you assess his position now? Has he failed? Do you think he would be accepted with open arms by protesters, or would he be pushed back and say, please, have another go, try and persuade the Supreme Military Council?
I think with Prime Minister ISSAM Sharif, there's a balance of views. Like there are different views because from the perspective of failure, he has failed and he should join Tahrir. But he was there when they banned like protests and strikes. So that is a huge failure. There's an irony to him promising to go back to Tahrir but then banning it. I think that most protesters feel that he does not have much power, and that the ruling military council is really pulling all the strings, and that he's just he can't do anything about it. And the best thing for him to do would be to resign, but people would still accept that.
Sharif is nodding in agreement with you, but I want to go to Rami because I think Wael's just basically pointed us in the next direction, that if the Prime Minister has no power, all fingers then point back to the military, Rami, and the power that they do wield and how they will wield it.
Well, you know, next year the power in Egypt would have been held by the military essentially since 1952, with no real break in that process. And this is not only in Egypt, this is all across the Arab world. That's why this citizen revolt that you're witnessing, this Arab reawakening, is taking place in so many Arab countries, even ones that have more wealth than others, like Bahrain, for instance. There's discontent all across the region, and it has many causes, but one of them is the sustained rule by political elites that are essentially put in place by military groups in the countries. Men with guns have been ruling the Arab world for 2 generations. And people have had enough of it because they've failed in almost every single respect. And therefore, the military must be brought under civilian oversight. The military has a huge responsibility and much respect in Egypt, as it does in some other Arab countries. So but people don't want military rule. They want the military to do its job under civilian oversight, as has been happening in Turkey, for instance.
Yeah, pardon me, Rami, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. So do you think that these elections are coming at the right time, despite all the changes that are being proposed by the Supreme Military Council and the interim government as such?
My own sense is that the important thing is to have an electoral process that is open and fair and has real accountability and credibility and legitimacy. And the Egyptian people, I think, will make sure that that's the case. It may be that the Muslim Brothers are better organized than some other people. That's fine, but there'll be other elections coming down the road and many other mechanisms. The critical point in these transitions now is to make sure that citizens have opportunities through the legal system, through the media, through politics, through elections, through all kinds of different institutions, to make their voices heard, but more importantly, hold accountable those who exercise public power and authority. So I'm not too worried about the timing of the elections, but this is really up to the Egyptians to decide on.
Indeed. Less than a minute to go. Very quickly, Sharif, can I come to you? Are you happy with the way the process leading up to these elections is being conducted? Would you vote if you were an Egyptian? Would you? Yes,
I certainly will vote. I mean, with regard to the way, there's a lot of issues with the timing of the elections. It's unclear how the parliamentary elections are exactly going to take place, a list-based system or a constituency-based system. I think in terms of organizational purposes, I think it may be delayed for that. People have been calling it to be delayed for other reasons. I think it's a little dangerous to ignore the results of a democratic referendum, which was held in March, which calls for these elections to take place. But I think right now that I don't know that the country's ready just logistically for parliamentary elections of this scale to be held in September. But the Supreme Council has indicated that it will go ahead with this timetable. Prime Minister ISSAM Sharif said he personally supports a delay in the elections. So we'll have to see where that goes. But I think myself and many millions of Egyptians will certainly head to the polls on any election day to cast their vote in what is the first democratic process that Egyptians have seen in many lifetimes.
Okay, well, there for the moment we do have to leave it. Gentlemen, a very interesting conversation, and we will be keeping a very close eye on what goes on in Egypt as we lead up to those elections. Wael Eskandar, Rami Khouri, Sharif Abdel Kouddous, thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on Inside Story, and thank you for watching. We do welcome your comments for future editions of the programme. Do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sohail Rahman. Until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.